My name is Todd Bierman from Claremont, Missouri, and what I do is give everybody a taste of the Old West, and I show them three tools of the Old West, and that is the bullwhip and the rope and the six gun, and I give them a little bit of history of each one of them. And I guess the bullwhip is the first thing that I start out with, and the bullwhip was probably back in the early 1800s on the cattle drives that came out. That was when it really became popular, and there's many different bullwhips. I have cowhide, kangaroo hide. They come in many different lengths. And one of the things back in the day, the cowboys never had to hit any animal with a bullwhip. All they had to do was crack the bullwhip, and that would move the animal. And one big reason why they didn't want to hit the animal, these things are no toys, and they would hurt an animal. They'd split their hide wide open, and back then they had no veterinaries, and they really couldn't afford to lose animals on the cattle drives. So that was one big thing. And them gentlemen that used the bullwhips back then were called bullwhackers. That was their title. They were pretty accurate with bullwhips back then. They could, if they seen a rattlesnake out there and ahead of them, they could crack that thing and cut it in two, and that's over with. So, and the other thing that they used were the ropes, and that was a very important tool of the cowboy back then. Many different styles of ropes, of course, and you get into the Mexican style ropes, whatever. The ropes I use today in spinning aren't any good for roping cattle. They're called the Samson number 12 spot cord. They're just a cotton cord used for rope spinning, and that's basically all they're good for. The guns of the Old West, of course, are the Colt single action Army 45s. Not the only guns that were made, such as the Winchesters and the Smith & Wessons, but these guns become famous as the Peacemaker, the Equalizer, the gun that won the West. And I want to stress that these guns are real, and every time I pick them up, I check them and make absolutely certain that they're not loaded. Sam Colt was not a cowboy, and he was a sailor, actually. And one day on his ship, he noticed that the ship's string wheel could rotate yet lock into place. So he sat down and carved himself out some holes in a block of wood, and when he got back to England in 1836, he patented the first revolving cylinder. And then when he came to the United States, he started to manufacture a firearm that had a cylinder that could spin freely yet lock into place whenever you wanted it to. And this was patented, this particular gun, in 1873. And these are single action guns, which means you cannot pull the trigger to make these guns fire. You have to pull the hammer back, then pull the trigger for each and every single shot. Fires 6 shots. And these guns were made back in, like I said, 1873, but manufactured in 1959. Prior to that, if you had a gun, it fired one time. And what you had to do is take the gun and pour shot down the thing, or powder down the thing, then shot, and then tamp this thing and all this, put a cap on the back and cock it and fire it. Well, you had to do that again. You had to start it all over again. Well, the bad guys and the Indians, they soon learned this and started attacking them in between the fires, okay? So Sam Colt changed all that. Now we're going to upgrade this to back in probably another 100 years, up to the 1950s and 60s. And this is when all the westerns started coming. And you had movies such as Wyatt Earp, you had Sugarloaf, you had, there was so many, the hype, oh man, there were so many of them I can't even name, Bonanza. And out of all of those, one of them stood out, and that was Gunsmoke. It lasted over 20 years. See, after all those movies, I mean, there was a lot of movie stars that were actually very, very good with Firearms. Sammy Davis Jr., Hugh O'Brien, and many, many others, Glenn Ford. But they all started, you know, they had their own series back then, and so they all started bragging about how good they were, and so they started having contests. And they put up money to see who the fastest gun was, and that's how this all started, and yet this is going on today. And you have the World Fast Draw Association, which is out there, and there's competition all over the United States, Canada, Japan, and all over. So that's what exists out of that. And well, ever since I was a little kid, about 8 tall, I watched all the westerns, you know, and they had my cap guns and sitting in the chairs, and grew up with hunting and fishing and all that. And long about, it's probably been 26 years ago now, a gentleman that was advertised that it was a stand-in for Clint Eastwood, and all of his westerns back then, his spaghetti westerns and everything, was coming to town. And he was performing a show, and he was doing fast draw and the gun spinning and ropes and all that. So I went in to see this guy and see what, you know, the show was about. And afterwards I went up and talked to him and met him, and we hit it off right then and there. And for this guy, he strapped his guns on me and said, try them on. And 2 weeks later, I ended up with my first gun, and we went from there, and I started doing shows with him, and he taught me the gun spinning, the rope spinning, the bull whips. And down the line, I've met out of shooting competition and everything else, and some other tricks I picked up in gun spinning from them. You know, Tom Wentz is another gentleman he lives in Deadwood, South Dakota, and so many others. Bob James, the guy that's worked on my guns, his great-grandfather was Frank James. And so I've met so many neat people out of doing this, but he's taught me an awful lot. So, matter of fact, a friend of mine out of Fremont made these holsters for me, and Ed hand tooled them for me. When I started doing it, I did it every day for 2-3 hours a day when I had every spare moment. And I mean, I never had any intention of ever doing shows, none. I was too embarrassed to get up in front of anybody and say anything, but I just wanted to do it for myself, and he just kept on and on and on, you know, and he seen how good I was getting better, and I went from 1 gun to 2 guns, and I went from that to the ropes and to the bull whips, and then he talked me into getting up and doing a show with him, and it just went on from there. I've done shows quite a few different places. My biggest one, I think, was up in Deadwood. I was doing a competition up there, and I got on stage just before the Oak Ridge Boys went on. There was probably about 5,000 people standing out there in that street. Well, it's nerve-wracking at first because, you know, it's you know, I don't want to drop my guns in front of people, and you know, or do any mistakes, and I want to be perfect at it. And there's not a lot of people around that do it, and that's probably one of the neatest things. And get up and you have a lot of kids that come around afterwards. And in my shows, I, you know, teach the gun safety, but I also have them come up. I have beginner ropes that I start kids out with and show them that they can do it too, and hopefully get them going on about it. And you know, this is a lost arts of the Old West, and there's not many people that do it, and I hope it carries on somewhere along the line. So I've taught my boy can do just about what I do, and you know, I do this, I do knife throwing, I can do just about everything with that. So.